The idea had been sitting in the back of her mind for months. A quiet thought at first, easy to push aside, but the more she reflected on it, the more it gnawed at her. Danielle Grayson built Grayson Trust from the ground up, her bank, her legacy. She wasn't just a CEO sitting in a glass office overlooking a skyline. She had spent years ensuring that her institution was different, accessible, built on fairness. The core philosophy, hammered into every employee manual, was you don't serve money, you serve people. But was it really living up to that? That was the question that kept her up at night. She'd heard whispers before, concerns about how certain customers were treated at certain branches. Nothing blatant, just a feeling. Stories from friends, comments in passing from people she trusted. She had brushed them off at first. After all, her bank had strict policies on fair treatment and customer service excellence. But policies were just words on a page. Real change came from action, and Danielle needed proof. She needed to know, not as a CEO, but as a customer, an underestimated customer. The strategy of underestimation. So today, she was just another woman walking into a bank. Her choice of attire was deliberate. A simple, slightly worn cardigan, faded jeans, and scuffed sneakers. This wasn't about catching someone in a publicized act of discrimination. It was about exposing the subtle, everyday implicit bias that the banking world often masked with professionalism. She wanted to remove the CEO armor and see how her employees treated someone they perceived as low value or out of place. She pulled into the parking lot of a Grayson Trust branch in Indianapolis, Indiana, a location she had personally greenlit just 3 years ago. She paused, looking at the plaque bearing the bank's motto, Integrity, Access, Community. Now she was walking in as a nobody, armed with nothing but her valid ID and an account holding a substantial fortune. The automatic doors slid open, and the lobby's crisp scent hit her. It was a slow afternoon. A man in an expensive but wrinkled suit stood 2 spots ahead of her. He was greeted with immediate warmth by one teller. "Good afternoon, sir. Thank you for waiting." Danielle adjusted her bag and stepped up to the only open teller, a young woman in her mid-20s with dark hair pulled into a stiff ponytail. The teller glanced up, no greeting, no smile, just a quick, uninterested once-over before shifting her attention back to the screen. Danielle cleared her throat. "Hi, I'd like to make a withdrawal." The teller didn't look up, just reached for a clipboard and slid it across the counter. "Fill this out." The form was standard. Danielle filled in the details, $5,000. She knew this amount was large enough to require ID verification, but small enough that it shouldn't trigger any major alarms. The microaggressions escalate. She slid the clipboard and her government-issued ID back to the teller. That was when the air changed. The teller's eyes flicked over the form, then to the ID. Her brows pulled together, lips pressing into a thin line. It was the start of the microaggression, the nonverbal signal that something was wrong, not with the transaction, but with the person presenting it. The teller glanced up again, this time actually looking at Danielle's face, comparing it to the ID photo. The hesitation lasted a beat too long, a moment of doubt. Danielle knew this wasn't policy, this was instinct. The teller's internal monologue was clearly asking, does this person look like they should have an account that handles a $5,000 withdrawal? Instead of proceeding, the teller muttered, I'll be right back," grabbing the ID and disappearing through a frosted glass door leading to the manager's office. Danielle leaned against the counter, counting the seconds. She'd given them the benefit of the doubt. Now they were simply being rude. The door finally swung open. The teller reappeared with Todd Larson, the branch manager. Middle-aged, stocky, with rimless glasses. His expression was polite, but unnervingly controlled. He stopped at the counter, giving her a tight-lipped smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Afternoon, ma'am. I understand you're trying to make a withdrawal?" "That's right. $5,000, my account, my ID. Daniel confirmed. Todd picked up the ID, studying it intently. He looked back at her. Miss Grayson, is this your first time banking with us? Danielle was floored by the question's implication. I've banked here since this branch opened. I helped open this branch. Todd gave a slow, exaggerated nod. And you said you're withdrawing $5,000. That's what I wrote down. Todd turned the ID over. And what do you do for work, Miss Grayson? I'm in finance, she said carefully. Oh, what kind? Banking, she stated simply. The refusal and the pretext of security. Todd placed the ID back on the counter. His decision was final. Unfortunately, we won't be able to process this withdrawal at this time. Danielle straightened, her initial frustration hardening into cold resolve. Excuse me, what do you mean you're unable to verify the transaction? You have my ID, you have my account number. What's there to verify? Todd clasped his hands together, deploying the corporate smokescreen. It's just a precaution we take. Large cash withdrawals require additional security steps. Security, Danielle repeated flatly. Like what, Todd? What exactly needs to be verified? He hesitated. Just some basic account verification? Can you tell me the last deposit amount made to this account? Danielle stared at him. That wasn't standard procedure. That was a demand designed to trip up someone they assumed was an imposter. I don't have that number memorized, she said evenly. But if you pull up my account, like you would for any other customer, you can see all my deposits. Of course, Todd smiled thinly, but in the interest of security, we need to make sure the account holder can confirm certain details first. Danielle's jaw tightened. I just gave you my ID. I followed protocol. So let me ask again, what's the real issue here, Todd? If I were a man in a tailored suit, would you be asking me these questions? A flicker of guilt crossed his face, but he quickly reasserted his control. This isn't about appearance, Miss Grayson. It's about policy. Policy, she scoffed. If I check my file, you'll see I've been banking here since day one. I helped open this branch. You might want to check before you dig this hole any deeper. But Todd was stubborn, trapped by his own bias and pride. He said, I'm sorry, Miss Grayson. Without additional verification, we can't process this withdrawal today.
Danielle let the refusal settle. Todd, the branch manager, was rigid, his face a mask of false security. She'd given him every opportunity to correct the situation, but his implicit bias had cemented his refusal. Now, she was done playing the role of the humble customer. Todd, she said, her voice dropping to a measured, dangerous calm. I gave you my ID and my account information. Instead of processing a routine withdrawal, you've accused me of using fraudulent documents and demanded personal financial details not required by policy. That is not security, that is profiling. The call for security. Todd, feeling his authority challenged, made his most critical mistake. He doubled down. His face flushed slightly. Ms. Grayson, if you cannot provide additional verification. He reached beneath the counter and pressed a discreet button, summoning security. A uniformed guard, broad-shouldered and unreadable, stepped out from a back office. Todd leaned toward the guard. Officer, we have a situation. The customer's being uncooperative and refusing to comply with necessary security measures for a large cash withdrawal. The guard stepped closer. Is there a problem here, ma'am? Danielle stepped away from the counter, her heels clicking against the polished tile as she made her way toward the exit. The silence in the bank was thick, almost suffocating. No one moved. No one spoke. Todd stood frozen, his business card still clutched in his trembling fingers. The teller looked as if she wanted the ground to swallow her whole. Danielle paused at the door, then slowly turned back around. She wasn't the type to let something this systemic slide. She had spent years building grace and trust on a bedrock of integrity. Today, that bedrock had cracked. "One last thing," she said, her voice steady, clear, and impossible to ignore. She scanned the room, making eye contact with the remaining customers. "This is the last time something like this happens in my bank." The weight of her words settled over the room. Todd flinched. The teller shifted. "I won't stand by while customers are treated differently because of assumptions, bias, or just plain ignorance," Danielle continued. "If this can happen to me, the CEO, then I can only imagine what happens to the people who don't have the power to push back." She looked directly at Todd. "Don't assure me," she said coolly. "Show me." She stopped the recording on her phone, slipping the device back into her back. "Corporate will be in touch. And Todd, you might want to start looking for a new job." She didn't wait for a response. She turned and walked out the door, the finality of her exit hanging in the air. The immediate fallout and executive action. The fallout was immediate and brutal. Within 20 minutes of Danielle leaving the branch, Todd Larson was in a frantic losing battle on the phone with the chief operating officer. The recorded evidence, coupled with his brazen denial of service to the company founder, was indefensible. Todd's termination and that of the teller was effective immediately, announced internally as a consequence of a severe breach of conduct and ethics policy. By the next morning, Danielle had called an emergency meeting with her entire corporate leadership team. No video conferences, everyone had to fly into the headquarters. The meeting began with Danielle playing the phone footage. The silent boardroom was thick with shame. "This is not a customer service issue," Danielle declared, her voice cold. "This is an integrity failure. Todd and that teller saw a woman they deemed unqualified for a simple transaction. They broke protocol, lied about security measures, and engaged in intimidation. This is the opposite of the bank's mission." Systemic change, the Grayson Protocol. Danielle refused to stop at firing 2 individuals. She launched a massive initiative to dismantle the implicit bias she had uncovered. The incident proved that written policies were insufficient. The culture itself needed restructuring. 1. Mandatory bias training and recertification. Every single employee, from the newest teller to the executive vice presidents, was mandated to attend a new, intensive 3-day bias training workshop led by external human resources experts. This wasn't a checkbox exercise. It included role-playing scenarios like Danielle's and mandatory annual recertification, with failures resulting in immediate disciplinary action. 2. The anonymous customer feedback system. Danielle implemented a new, independent, anonymous customer feedback system. This secure, third-party platform allowed customers to report any instance of perceived discrimination or differential treatment. Crucially, branch performance evaluations would now be weighted heavily by the scores from this system, directly tying bias to bonuses and promotions. 3. The Founders Audit. To ensure ongoing accountability, Danielle established the Founders Audit Protocol. Once a quarter, an anonymous, high-level corporate employee, sometimes Danielle herself, sometimes an assigned VP, would visit a random branch in disguise to perform a simulated high-risk or unusual transaction, specifically testing the staff's adherence to non-discrimination policies. Within weeks, Grace and Trust saw a profound cultural shift. Employees were more acutely aware of their conduct, not just because of the new rules, but because they understood the potential consequences were real and immediate. Customers, especially those who had historically felt marginalized, began to notice the difference in warmth and respect. Danielle never forgot that day in the bank. It was proof of something she had always known. Real change doesn't happen because of words on a page. It happens because someone refuses to accept the way things are. She had come into the bank seeking a simple withdrawal, but she left having bought something infinitely more valuable.